Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tracy McKibben, the Chair of the Finance and Risk Committee of the Authority and the New York State Canal Corporation. I'd like to welcome my fellow committee members, John Canal, Dennis Trainer, and Michael Balboni. Trustee Betheda Gonzalez is excused today. Also like to welcome our NYPA and Canal staff. This meeting has been duly noticed as required by the Open Meetings Law, and I call it to order. Everyone's had a chance to review our agenda for today. I'll ask if there are any amendments to that agenda.
Yeah.
If there are no amendments, I'll ask for a motion to adopt.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and
Aye.
seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The agenda is adopted. We will now have the next portion of this meeting will be an executive session. I'll ask for a motion to conduct an executive session to discuss the financial and credit history of a particular corporation pursuant to Section 105 of the Public Officers Law.
So moved.
I think I heard a seconded in there. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. We will be back with you shortly. Thank you. Great, thank you. I'll ask for a motion to resume the meeting in open session.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you. No votes were taken during our executive session. The members were polled prior to the meeting regarding conflicts and have submitted all potential conflicts to the corporate secretary for inclusion in the minutes. We'll jump right into our discussion agenda. And first up, I'll invite Adam Barsky, EVP and Chief Financial Officer, to present his report and the next two items on our agenda.
Yeah. We'll go right to the thanks slide. Okay. Good morning, trustees, NYPA colleagues, members of the public. Before we get into the financial report, I just thought it would be good to update the board and others on recent events in the financial markets regarding the banks. Chris, do you want to? Right. So we're going to put a slide up, but given the failure of the two banks, Silicon Valley and Signature Bank, two things. One is we had no exposure to those directly. Minor immaterial indirect exposure in some of our equity investments, but nothing of any materiality there. And in terms of our bank deposits, they are all, just so everybody's aware, they are all either collateralized fully with, cash or treasuries, and or fully FDIC insured. And we do have other bank and counterparty exposures. We're watching that very carefully. As I mentioned, we have 23 million in a regional bank, again, fully collateralized and or FDIC insured. And we do monitor these exposures on a real-time, regular basis. I'll explain a little bit how we do that. Also, we have, our policies, which are to make sure that we only accept letters of credit from banks that we consider highly rated. And we make sure that we have, concentration limits and exposures, again, monitored on a regular basis. We also monitor through risk management is that we look at all of our exposures. We are always looking at, obviously news, credit rating updates and things like that. But the most effective measure we have is the CDS market, which is the credit default swap market. So credit default swaps are basically an insurance policy you could go out and buy to protect your interest in say you had held a bond from a bank. If you wanted to protect your interest from default, you can buy an insurance policy called a credit default swap. So those are commonly used to manage and hedge exposures in the financial industry. So there's a very active market for that. And we do monitor that. So when you see a blip or a spike, it indicates, hey, the market is saying there's something up here. We should look into it further. So that's how we go about monitoring all our bank exposures on a regular basis. So you want to go to as an example, we could show you some slides. So this is kind of representative of the entire money center bank industry. We just chose JP Morgan because they are our main bank. But you can see here how that credit default swap market works. You can see the big spike, at the beginning of the pandemic. Then things normalized, came down as the federal government stepped in. And then you can see later on in 22, there were a number of spikes, mostly dealing with the Ukraine events and other things going on geopolitically. And then you could see at the, very recently where the arrow is, the spike we're seeing as a result of the bank failures. We don't think that these are isolated events. We think that there will be rippling impacts from these events. Most of this has to do with, obviously, the rapid rise in interest rates and what it's done to the carrying value of banks' securities as it relates to their other exposures and their exposure to interest rate risk. So that's being experienced throughout the market. Everybody has it. So
And I assume we follow this for all of the banks that we do.
Yes.
This was just JP Morgan.
that was
but
JP Morgan.
we do
Here's
it for
another, go to the next slide. Here's another example of Credit Suisse, which is also in the news right now. And they're also on sort of life support. They just recently asked the federal, their government, Switzerland, for a $54 billion backstop facility. But we saw the spike back in 22. So you can see when the first spike happened, and we had, put them on a watch list, and we said we won't take any exposure. We have no exposure there, but we were able to utilize this as an early warning sign something was going on. So we were able to act quickly. But just to give you a flavor of how we monitor.
Great. Good.
Okay, now we'll go back to the regular. If there were any other questions on that from the trustees?
And you'll just continue to update us if
Yes.
there's anything that comes up that does impact us.
Yep, will do. And like I said, there's going to be some, more rippling shocks along the way in terms of probably there will be a tightening of credit and liquidity, and that will be felt, in the economy generally. So I think there will be more impacts that will result from this. As far as where we are through February, we are at 53 million against
Hey,
the
Adam.
budgeted target
Adam.
of 60. Yep.
Yeah, before you jump into that, just
Yes,
staying
Chairman.
with your theme, so this tightening of the credit markets and access to funding, is there any reason to believe that, would impact us adversely, given the assorted initiatives, or we're well positioned from a balance sheet standpoint, our own credit facilities, our success in the markets over the last 12, 18 months, et cetera? Just 2 minutes on that.
Sure. So, and we'll have a scorecard update that we've also prepared as part of the year-end update for the regular board meeting. So we'll give a full update on the strength of our balance sheet and the actions we've taken over the last few years from the beginning of the pandemic to where we are now. And you'll be able to see how much we have, the actions we have taken have strengthened our balance sheet significantly, and our liquidity is high as it's ever been. And we've have gotten access to committed lines of credit from, a number of banks, including JP Morgan. Those are like legal commitments, and we've recently just extended those for multi-year. So we're sort of locked in terms of having the access to those credit facilities. My point was that for people trying to get new right now, it may start to become more difficult and more expensive. So we're fortunate that we've locked in all of our credit facilities. We don't expect to be going to the market for any financing until probably early of 24. Will give us enough time to assess, where things are by then. So I think we'll be okay there. So we have, all those actions we've taken from the pandemic have well positioned us here. Our commercial paper balance is way down, so we have a lot of capacity there as well. So really strong on the liquidity front.
And I think as we've chatted in the past, it's another reason why we got to weave, balance sheet into, this ongoing dialogue. So it's not just P&L focused, okay?
Absolutely. That's why we've worked it into the board presentation.
Yep. And at committee level as well. So let's keep working on that, all right?
Sure.
You and Tracy, but
Will do.
yeah, our balance sheet strength, it becomes all the more of a differentiator and all the more, critical to our ongoing effectiveness and success. So well done, but just wanted, clarity for the sake of all. So thank you.
Sure, thank you. So where we are through February, as I mentioned, we're at 53 million versus a target of 62. We're lower than our budgeted target for this point in the year, which is driven by really two major factors: is the significant decrease in the price of natural gas and the prices in which we observe and receive in the markets that we generate. So price has had a major effect, as well as the quantity of what we are generating because of the warmer than expected weather for the winter season. So our facilities were not being called on as often as they would have been planned for normal weather, in January, February. We mentioned at last meeting, we track that by the number of heating or cooling degree days as a measure of, how is that versus the average or prior year. So we'll continue to give updates around that. Some of the drop in revenues is being offset, obviously, by our hedging program. So we're, significantly hedged. That's probably, it's cutting our risk by over 50%. So whatever we're seeing as a reduction has been mitigated by at least half. We have other hedges that will actually settle positive and further help offset some loss. And some of the expenses are running behind projections, and some will have to just keep watching closely as we go through the year. So we'll be on, regular updates and watching as the year unfolds. It's very early, obviously, in the year, but we will be providing regular updates to where we are to get back to plan. Next slide. And this is the year-end forecast. So what we've done is we've lowered the range so that it's moved down by at least 10 million. So right now we're saying the range for the year, based on what we know today, is between 75 and 95, with 85 as being the expected case based on what we know today. Obviously, we're very early. And, as we've spoken about leading up to this, lots of volatility in the market continues, and lots of events going on we have to watch closely, and including the latest one that we are watching, and we'll see what impact that's going to have on the economy, the probability of a recession maybe becoming accelerated, and what happens with the remainder of the Fed's policies in terms of future interest rate hikes. So all of that will be significant to watch as we move forward.
But nothing, Adam, to date that you feel gives us concern that we need to start thinking about our plans for, for the year, right?
No.
Obviously, we're just in March, so we're still at the beginning of the year, although March has come in quite with a roar. But nothing that at this point you think jeopardizes our full year plans for any investments that we're going to make.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Whether it be on the major capital projects or other initiatives, we're full steam ahead. And as I mentioned, we have lots of good, hedging and other things in place to help, protect us from the downside of any of the effects of these events, but still have to be watching carefully. But I don't think anything here, other than just missing our target somewhat, will jeopardize our initiatives or things we're setting out to do as part of Vision 2030.
Great. Okay, so no votes are necessary for this. This is more just an update. Any other questions for Justin on our year-to-date financials? All right, next topic, release of funds.
So this is a release of funds for the next quarter for the canals. It's, canals are continuing to track towards to budget. So the release has been scheduled to according to what is needed for the budget. So there's no need for any additional. And this is required each time for every quarter. So if there's any questions on that, please let me know. And otherwise, we'd seek a recommendation to pass.
Any questions for Adam on this? This is our, our annual, and obviously we're gonna, I think at some point in the future, have a discussion around the expectations around Canal and Reimagine Canal, but this is just our normal release of funds.
And no other surprises.
If no question,
No other surprises in canal operations at this point, right, Adam?
No,
Okay,
Okay. With that, I'll entertain a motion to recommend this item for the full board adoption.
so, second,
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, Adam.
sure. This is the release of funds in support of the Western New York Power Proceeds Allocation Act. So as you recall, when we were giving the year-end summary, and as far as the monetized funds, the Western New York funds, obviously, for, the 100 megawatts of power that is not being used, the way it works is that if the energy that we ultimately earn is greater than the tariff rate, that extra money is made available to be put into these funds to be used for economic development projects. So given the strong year we had last year, or almost say an anomaly of a year that we had, given the energy prices spike, it worked out to be a big benefit for the Western New York funds in terms of what will be available for them for economic development projects. So we're asking for a release of up to 37 million. And what that release will do is it sets it aside, and as the trustees deemed feasible and advisable. And then if the board, the Power Allocation Board, comes to us with projects, we will then negotiate with them and enter into a contract with those entities and bring that back to you to approve the allocation of that 37 million to those particular projects.
Just funding available to encourage business development, economic development.
That's
and
correct.
For businesses in Western New York.
Right. If you recall, as I was saying, it looked like we had higher expenses this year, but a lot of that was driven by this 37 million, which we say is more of a dividend from the higher earnings we had on our merchant portfolio to invest back into economic development in that Western New York area, which I believe is defined by a 25-mile radius of the Niagara plant.
Any
Yeah,
other
this is
questions for
obviously-
Adam on this? Sorry, go
Obviously,
ahead.
great news. Yeah, obviously, great news, and so endorse Adam's reaffirmation of his comments from our last board meeting. It is a dividend. It's an investment in our community. So I enthusiastically make this motion.
I second.
Can I get a second, then?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, those are your two items. And next up, we'll
Thank you.
invite Thomas Spencer to come up, Senior Director, Enterprise and Operational Risk, to present an update for the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, trustees, NYPA employees, and members of the public. In today's presentation, I really want to go over what I consider a major advancement in risk reporting for NYPA and Canals. It's a shift away from the traditional laterally raised risk group reporting to a more combined and comprehensive format in one risk dashboard. By leveraging the work of multiple groups, we're able to provide a more complete and comprehensive dashboard that will provide enhanced visibility and transparency into our enterprise risk profiles. The dashboard includes inputs from varied sources. We get information from previous operational enterprise risk assessments that include emerging and enterprise risk drivers. We take input and feedback from the operations risk, internal business controls, resiliency, insurance, business units, and internal audit teams to broaden our view of risk mitigation activities. These inputs are then used to produce a risk management and control score. And that score is a measure on how well we are managing and controlling that risk. There's an example of the speedometer to the right-hand side of the presentation that shows how that score will be plotted on the risk dashboard, telling us what zone as far as risk management we fall in.
And this is a self-assessment, right? It's our evaluation of.
Yeah, we're getting information from all these different groups. And we have a scoring procedure I'll go through on the next slide to come up with the score. But we get inputs from all these different groups to calculate the score. which is, again, a measure of how well we're managing and controlling this risk and displayed in the speedometer format. We then overlay that risk with our desired risk appetite range. And we can also see, one, how we're managing the risk and if we're also managing it within the desired risk management zone. The dashboard is a 2-page report. First page is a summary. The second page is a detailed breakdown of the dashboard components used to calculate the risk management control scored. And I will walk through an actual example for third-party risk on my next two slides. And it'll give you a better idea of some of the detailed components and how they're utilized to create the dashboard report. The go-forward plan is to produce this report twice a year for each enterprise level risk on a rolling quarterly basis. So what that means is approximately 10 reports will be produced every quarter. And that's a big improvement over what we did previously, which was a somewhat static once a year annual report without the same level of granularity you'll be getting from the dashboard. Before I leave this slide, I just want to say I'm positive that after you review these reports, the Board of Trustees and NYPA leadership will confidently be able to assess how well we're managing and controlling these risks in a more transparent and frequent manner. Go to the next slide. So this is the first page of the 2-page dashboard report for third-party risk. The very top of the page and above the blue line is the risk management team's summary of the factors influencing these risks, the risk management and control score, and what that means in terms of alignment to NYPA's risk appetite. In this example, the risk management team concludes we are operating in a well-managed risk management control zone for third-party risk and also within our risk appetite. If you focus your attention on the second half of the page and below the blue line, that details how the risk management and control score is calculated. So the calculation uses a weighted average approach across 5 categories. Those categories are risk drivers, operational risk and controls, resilience factors, key metrics, and internal audit status. So now if we focus our attention back on the speedometer in the lower right-hand side, you can see what the actual risk management and control score was calculated for third-party risk. If you follow the black arrow to the outer edge of the circle, you'll see that we are in the green, well-managed and controlled area for this risk. Additionally, when you look at the blue area we have labeled as risk appetite, which comes from our risk appetite statement, you will see that we're also managing this risk within our desired risk appetite range. The objective of this page was to provide leadership a way of gauging how well we are managing and controlling our risk in a repeatable and easy to read format by plotting risk management control score against our risk appetite. We can go to the next
Hey,
page.
Tom, before you
Yep.
flip.
Yes.
So
Sure.
help me connect your yellow, green, red, and the risk appetite bar. So we're saying that your blue risk appetite bar suggests at least I'm taking anything that falls within that risk appetite range is acceptable to us. So
That's correct.
the fact that it's well managed or moderately managed is not that significant or less significant. So I'm just trying to determine what's the real target zone for us. It's the risk appetite zone as opposed to ensuring we're in the green zone. In this case, we're willing to take some level of risk, right?
That's correct. So I think ideally, you'd want to have your risk well managed and be in the green zone. However, based on our risk appetite statement, we identified a range where we desired to be as far as potentially taking more or less risk. So, the connection is it's on the same scale. Usually we used a 1 to 5 scale for both the risk appetite and our risk management and control score, so they aligned. So that's how we made sure when we overlaid it that it was overlaid comparing apples to apples. But to your point,
Well-
if you wanted to take on more risk and be higher as far as your being the higher end of your risk appetite range, you may not necessarily need to have your risk as well managed or controlled as it was if you had a low risk appetite tolerance.
And hence, I've talked to you guys before. I mean, I hate talk about risk in a vacuum. I'd like to talk about risk and reward. So willing to take risk if the rewards are commensurate. So part of me would challenge why we don't move further to the right here. That having a well-managed risk versus moderately managed in and of itself, there's no gold star for that. It's about the risk reward dynamic. So I don't know what the reward, if the incremental reward of moving to the right in your risk appetite bar is, but again, that's why I hate talking about risk in a vacuum. Would ask between you, Adam, otherwise, we think about how we just create some bigger picture context here, because there's time to take risk and there's time to not. And that's primarily a function of how well can you control and manage the risk, and is the reward commensurate? So, all right.
Tom, maybe if you could speak a little bit to what's contained in the third-party risk. There are different types of third parties that we deal with, correct? Some of them are instances where we might have a partnership potentially where there'd be higher rewards.
Yeah, so first, a couple things. Excellent point, Justin. So, this is kind of the first time since I've been here, where we've been able to kind of mesh the kind of overall risk score to the risk appetite. So it's a starting point, and I think the evolution of that is exactly what you're talking about, Mr. Chairman, as far as, if we do want to take on more risk, like how do we do that? So at least now we kind of have a gauge, literally, to see where we are in that regard. And then within the risk appetite statement, we had an excellent presentation on, environmental justice and DEI earlier today. And one of the things that we talked about with strategic supply management was, maybe we'll have to look at the credit requirements in other areas when we look at strategic supply management, so we can invite and extend and have more suppliers and diversify our supplier portfolio. So even within the risk appetite category, right, like we have a low risk appetite for, critical suppliers, critical vendors we need for parts to run our plants. And then on the outside of the risk appetite, well, maybe we want to back off on some of that, which would be at the higher end, right? If we want to try to diversify our supplier portfolio. So, I wish I could, bifurcate a little bit earlier, but there is a little bit of just individuality based on the type of supplier you're dealing with and, what you're trying to accomplish and achieve. So I do think we're getting there. To me, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, this is a big step forward because it, for the first time, takes a lot of information and puts it together so we can have a better overall view of where we stand from a risk appetite and a risk management and control score. But certainly, right, feedback is great, and always try to learn and move forward from that perspective.
Okay, no, thanks.
Yep, no problem. Hopefully I answered your question. So, kind of what we had talked about a little bit, just as far as looking at different information. So this is the second page of the risk dashboard report. It's the detail of the report, and then separated into the different component areas that I had mentioned earlier, used to calculate the risk management and controls graphic. The goal of this is to provide the board a comprehensive view of all the mitigation activities and actions that the risk owners, their teams and different teams across NYPA are taking to ensure that the risk of the organization are managed and appropriately controlled. And there's a lot of information on this page and a lot to digest. And it was provided in pre-read, so I wasn't going to go through each section during this presentation in kind of the essence of time. But what I did want to do is go through a few of the sections that I thought weren't always explicitly considered or identified when you were looking at our risk posture. So certainly open to any questions as we go along, but the few areas I did want to highlight was the first was operational risk, which is in the heat map in the center of the page. So when we do this, we map internal controls to operational risk to gain insight on how well those operational risks that influence our part or can be mapped to the third party risk, larger enterprise risk, how well they're controlled. And if they're well controlled, we can get a better handle on what our risk score would be. So in this example, you can see that 20% of the high and medium level risk had controls mapped to them. So they got the low end of the score on that when we used it to develop our risk management controls score. The second area that I don't think people necessarily think about in a large picture is at the bottom of that page around insurance coverage. So insurance is another thing that we do to reduce our risk exposure by transferring that risk to a third party. So in this section of the chart of the dashboard, we try to identify all the different policies that we have that have some level of third party coverage in that and range it out along all those policies from what our deductibles were compared to what our coverage limits were in the bottom. Obviously, depending on the type of policy and the type of event, the numbers may change. However, wanted to give the board and leadership an idea of we do have sufficient amount of insurance coverage to help us reduce and mitigate this risk. The last part that I wanted to try to highlight on this page was on the lower left-hand side, which is around internal audit. So by looking at what internal audits were performed and mapped to third-party risk and what the corresponding level of those audit findings were, we can get greater insight and information into how well the policies, processes, and procedures used to control the exposure to this risk are being handled and how effective they are to further help us manage this risk. So I think the enterprise risk dashboard, in my opinion, is a big leap forward in how we view and report on risk here at NYPA and Canals. Not only is it a more comprehensive view of our risk profile and what efforts we are employing to try to reduce that risk, but it also gives us the ability to see what areas may require greater focus. Is it controls? Is it resilience, operational risk, internal audit? And since we'll be reporting on these snapshots on a biannual basis, we'll be able to measure changes in a much more timely fashion and see if those areas are improving. For me, a lot of teams have worked on this and over the past several months, and I think one of the really important messages is that it's a great example of how combined efforts that we kind of were all doing in the past come together, right? And we work together to ensure that the risk of the authority are being properly managed and controlled. So shout out to all the teams that I mentioned and helped us with this, but I do think it's a big step forward from where we were, even 6 months ago, definitely over a year or two ago.
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, the maturity of our enterprise risk management process is one worth commending the team for. So I wholeheartedly agree with what you said. I did have one question, and I've raised it in the past, and I know it's because of my inability to understand what should properly fall under the categories. But whenever I see emerging risk drivers and I don't see cyber under there, especially in this one, we're talking about third parties. And as we become more digitally connected or electronically connected with our third parties, why that's never seen as an emerging risk? Is it because it's not considered emerging anymore? It's just a standard risk that we always look at. So I always wonder about that.
Cyber is one of our enterprise level risk. So we do catch it through that lens.
So the third party is brought in under the broader cyber. Okay.
I would say the IA component of that is a driver that we follow and we consider as an emerging risk, but it is covered off through the third party and through the cyber enterprise risk.
Any other questions? Again, as the team continues to mature and bring forward, I appreciate this. Very good.
Okay, great, thank you.
Way to understand how you are evaluating and monitoring the risk across the enterprise.
Okay, so it's a lot of work that
Yep,
teams have
the
already
team.
been doing.
Yeah,
Right, we just
great.
bring it together.
Pulling it together. No votes are necessary. Now we'll turn it over to, we'll invite Patricia Lombardi, SVP Project Delivery, to present her item for the committee.
Good morning, Chair McKibben, committee members, NYPA staff and public. I'm here today to present a recommendation in support of the Brockport Pedestrian Bridge, which is part of the Reimagine the Canals portfolio. Today, we're requesting the Finance and Risk Committee recommend approval of additional capital expenditures in the amount of $9.5 million and a 3-year construction services contract in the amount of $12.5 million to Crane Hogan Structural Systems of Spencerport, New York for implementation of the project. Reimagine the Canals program was approved by the board in 2020 in January. The program aims to revitalize the canal system by making improvements to enhance and improve the resiliency of the system and surrounding communities, while also promoting economic development. At that time in 2020, this pedestrian bridge was presented as one of the first 5 defined priority investment opportunities within the RTC program. It was presented at that time with an estimated cost of $7 million for direct construction only. This bridge, which will be located immediately adjacent to the guard gate at Brockport, will connect the existing Empire State Trail and the village of Brockport on the north side of the canal to the SUNY Brockport campus on the south side. Since 2020, stakeholder engagement continued and engineering design progressed. In 2021, an interim updated estimate for the total project was developed in the approximate amount of $13.9 million, which was included in the authority's long-range work plan. In November 2022, 3 bids for construction services, including fabrication of the bridge, were received, and the total estimated cost of the project was updated and increased to $23.4 million. The largest drivers for the cost increase include underestimated costs for construction attributed to higher steel fabrication, as well as additional work associated with the relocation of existing electrical utilities within the project site boundary. As such, staff are recommending the approval of an additional $9.5 million above the current long-range work plan to complete the project at a cost of $23.4 million. In terms of the contract, staff are recommending award to Crane Hogan Structural Systems. Crane Hogan, a New York State certified service-disabled veteran-owned business, provided the best value proposal, has successfully completed work for both NYPA and the Canals, and most recently received the Diversity Champion of Excellence Award as an SDVOB at NYPA Supplier Diversity Expo held earlier this month, which Eric Alamany referenced earlier. And lastly, we do want to acknowledge the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation today, who have committed $2 million to NYPA in support of the project, which is not included in the total cost of the project presented today. Additionally, we would like to highlight that as a result of this investment by NYPA, the Village of Brockport has secured a $1.2 million grant from the Federal Highway Administration Transportation Alternatives Program, also known as TAP, to complete the loop within Brockport, further underscoring the economic and recreational benefits of this investment by NYPA. In closing, we will be back in front of the full board very shortly here to provide a full update on RTC, on how it is and will continue to support the canal's revitalization. And thank you. I'll take any questions now and ask for your vote.
I guess the first question, Trish, I want to make sure that I understand, and it's on me, what it is that we're approving. So today, it's both the contract award, right? In addition to the increase in the estimate.
Correct.
To $23.4 million for this bridge. And thank you. I appreciate understanding how this connects, because what we want to do is we want to use our ability to invest in communities to open up opportunities for them to further invest in their communities. And so I assume that this loop would not have been something that the village could do without our coming in and providing this upfront investment around the bridge that connected the
Correct,
university.
right, in the community of Brockport, right, being on the trailway there, right, one of the canals town, continuing to look for opportunities to use this investment by NYPA to further enhance recreational opportunities, whether it be marinas, docks, right, other enhancements in the area as well, because NYPA is making this investment.
Great. Any other questions from the rest of the committee on this?
No, I just underscore the point that, Trish made. It'd be great to talk about this at full board within the context of Reimagine 2.0 and all the rest of that. So we have some bigger picture context and frankly, further lean into what you just referenced, Tracy, the opportunity to bring others to the table. Again, I'll underscore Tricia's points to thank and acknowledge the Wilson Foundation for their continued investment in our extended communities. And that's what we're looking to stimulate. And that's the opportunity that we have across the canal system, do the loaves and fishes routine. And yep, we've got good seed money and firepower, and we're looking to bring others to the table. So look forward to talking about some of the bigger picture opportunities there as well. So that said, I'm happy to move the proposal.
I'll second.
Got it. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The consent agenda is before the committee. You've had a chance to review it. Are there any questions or concerns? If there are none, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next joint finance and risk committee meeting is scheduled to be held on May 9th. I'll ask for a motion to close this meeting.
Second.
Motion moved and
I look like-
seconded. All in
I think I
favor,
saw
say
Dennis'
aye.
mouth moving. Aye.
Exactly. I think he's moving because that folder's going into his bag. That was his
Yeah,
motion.
exactly.
All right.
I can tell
Any
he's in-
opposed?
he's in motion.
I'm in motion.
Exactly. All right,
Aye.
thank you. Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank
Very
you,
good.
everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks very
Stay
much.
safe.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks,
It's like,
Trace.
I